Good morning or good afternoon, everyone. Today we begin our journey into the legal system of the United States of America, a system that has shaped not only its own society, but also influences legal thinking across the globe. This is not a technical or exhaustive lecture, but rather an engaging overview that connects legal history, constitutional development, and judicial interpretation in the United States, using Legos and some materials that I have to make us travel better into time. First, this year, 2026, it's the year where we are celebrating the 250 years of the Declaration of Independence. So the historical foundations of the United States begin in the 4th of July of 1776 with the Declaration of Independence that was driven by demands for representation and tax relief, not just independence. And it was preceded by the Boston Tea Party, which marked the start of the revolution. The Constitution itself, both the Declaration of Independence and the U.S. Constitution, were written by lots of great founding fathers. The main founding father who achieved a compromise solution was James Madison, but you have two forces. One general who led the armies of the United States was George Washington, and then two forces, a lawyer, a bold lawyer like me, not very tall too, who was called John Adams, who believed in a system much more like the English system and much more centralized, and Thomas Jefferson, who believed in more powers to the colonies, and we lived in Virginia. So John Adams is from the north of the United States, from one of the colonies, Massachusetts. I don't know how to pronounce it. And Thomas Jefferson is from the south. And James Madison was also from the south, and he was able to forge a compromise text between the ideas of these two founding fathers. Another founding father, also very important, is Alexander Hamilton. He was from the same party of John Adams. You can see a musical about him in Disney Plus or live at West End or Broadway, and it's great. I recommend it. And a series in HBO about John Adams. And probably during this year, you will see more movies and television series about the founding fathers of the United States. So the U.S. Constitution is inspired by the Enlightenment ideals and some of the European models, and assents in 4 key principles. The first principle is federalism. States retain powers unless explicitly delegated by federal government. Second principle, democracy. All public offices are elected and there are no hereditary titles. So this goes against the monarchy was vigent in England, and this is a very important distinction, but also they received the Magna Carta. So I have copies of both the Constitution here with the people in the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, and the Magna Carta, because the United States legal system received the English law, the common law of England, in its Declaration of Independence and in its Constitution, but received with an asterisk, without hereditary titles. So federalism, democracy, republicanism, each state elects its own governor and legislature. We will talk about the separation of powers, and I will show you a building about each of these powers. And we have three branches: executive power, legislative power, and judicial power. They are distinct, and they are interdependent. So there are mechanisms of checks and balances that were forged since the beginning of the United States, more than in France or in England. They were interdependent and they controlled each other. So the founding fathers and political tensions. The most important and the founding father who everyone knows is George Washington. George Washington was the first president of the United States. If you go to the city, the capital city, it's called Washington, D.C. You have a monument. I have here skyline of Washington. This is the Washington Monument. This is the Supreme Court, or not? No, this is the White House. This is the Capitol. This is the Supreme Court, and this is the Smithsonian, the most important museum of the Capitol. And George Washington inspired lots of leaders, and mainly the presidents of the United States, because he was able to, in a time where almost all the presidents kept and all emperors wanted to last until the end of the days, George Washington was elected for one mandate of 4 years, then another mandate of 4 years, and then he left office with a very famous speech that was written with Alexander Hamilton. There's a very famous scene in this musical with Hamilton helping him. He quotes the Bible and he wants to go to his farm to live by the fig tree. And it's very impressive how he was able to leave office and to leave power. And there was a time there wasn't an amendment to the Constitution as we have today. So Franklin Delano Roosevelt in the 20th century was able to be elected 4 times. We have it isn't common in the history of the United States to have presidents being re-elected successfully. FDR is the most famous one. But after FDR, the amendment prohibits a president to be elected more than 2 times. President Trump is saying lots of things about this and about lots of things. But he is according to the law, is not able to be elected in 2028. The second founding father is the first vice president, because when you elected the presidents, what you elected first was and still is the great electors, and in each state we elect the great people that go to Washington. Then it was in Philadelphia, and they go to the capital city and they vote in the best primus inter pares. So George Washington was elected the first president of the United States, and the second most voted candidate was John Adams, and he is the first vice president of the United States. He says a funny thing that it's the most important case with less powers, and there's a comic series about Veep. It's called Veep, with a famous actress playing this role of the vice president, and about the few powers that a vice president has. Then Thomas Jefferson is like the prime minister, was like the prime minister of this government, prime minister and minister for foreign affairs. Nowadays, nowadays the vice president is J.D. Vance, as you may know. Before it was Kamala Harris, and the Secretary of State nowadays is Marco Rubio, who yesterday was with the Pope. And is of Cuban descent. Thomas Jefferson was a very interesting character, and Next week, we will have in our class the clash between the view of John Adams and the view of Thomas Jefferson. And I will make some drawings in the board about with all the systems that are going against each other. Thomas Jefferson was the Minister for Foreign Affairs or Secretary of State. And then Alexander Hamilton was the Minister of Secretary of Treasury, Minister of Finances. And the Secretary for Justice was James Madison. And they all worked with each other. So John Adams was later the second president of the United States. Thomas Jefferson was the third president of the United States. So John Adams was the first vice president to be elected, and then was the first sitting president to be removed from office through an election. Thomas Jefferson was elected president for 2 terms, and then he was replaced by James Madison, who was his Secretary of State and his best friend. Benjamin Franklin was the creator of the post offices. John Jay was the first Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. John Marshall was the Secretary of State of John Adams, was his best friend, and was nominated by him to be the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. And he will be the one ruling or deciding who will be most important in the case Marbury versus Madison. So we had an ideological divide between Federalists like Adams and Hamilton, who favored central government and financial unity. They wanted a federal debt. And Republicans like Jefferson and Madison, who defended state autonomy and agrarian values. This was very important. In the musical, there's a famous song called "The Room Where It Happens," where Alexander Hamilton achieves his mission, and he was able to leave Thomas Jefferson and James Madison thinking they won because they had the capital in Virginia. So Washington, D.C. is in their home state, but everything else, Hamilton wins. Hamilton has the financial center in New York, in the Wall Street, the city of the wall, the street of the wall. He has the dollar, a unique coin, stable coin for all the country, and he has a Federal Reserve controlling his debt. So this is the deal between Alexander Hamilton and James Madison and Thomas Jefferson. He was able to achieve their votes in the Congress to have this package with the capital in Virginia, but everything else is in New York. And Alexander Hamilton was from New York. He was an immigrant, but he was from New York. So the structure of the government, you have a Senate. I have here. So first, the most important power is the legislative power. You have the Senate here, and you have the House of Commons in England, but the Congress here. In the beginnings, the Supreme Court worked inside this building, but then they moved to New York, and then they changed to a new building that was built by an ex-president who was Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. So he loved more being a justice than being President of the United States. And his name was William Howard Taft in the beginning of the 20th century. So this was in the 16th of January. This was invaded, probably. We still don't have the final ruling about this. But this building, you can visit this building if you go to Washington. You have to book with advance to enter some rooms. with the senator that is responsible. But I have already entered the rooms of both the Congress and the Senate, and I'm a geek of the Supreme Court and also the Congress of the United States. As you might see, this is my personal Congress of the United States. This Congress has two senators elected by state per state, with 6-year terms, and the elections are staggered. So in 2024, we elected the senator from New York 1. In 2026, we will elect the senator from New York 2. And in 2028, we will not elect a senator from New York. But we always elect a third of the Senate in each 2 years. The House of Representatives is fully elected every 2 years. So they have a full renewal each cycle. And it's highly probable that with these approval ratings, President Trump will lose control of the House of Representatives in November of 2026. The executive is here. So here is my White House. Outside of the White House and inside, I have here another inside with Trump giving a speech with some bloody face. This is fighting to be and to remain in power. And this is the White House phone to make all the important calls that presidents usually have. I usually was more fascinated with presidents of the United States because they were more enthusiastically before President Trump. Here I have a box. Perhaps I will only bring this box, but I have George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, I have John Jay, I have Donald Trump, another with fake news. I have Kamala Harris, I have Joe Biden, I have Barack Obama and Michelle Obama, I have Ruth Bader Ginsburg, I have Abraham Lincoln, Nelson Mandela, lots of other figures, and even the Statue of Liberty and Hillary Clinton, when I thought she was going to be the president of the United States. So the president is elected every 4 years, and he can be elected for a maximum of 2 terms. And the vice president breaks Senate ties. Today it's J.D. Vance because there's no such thing as a large majority in the Senate. They only have 3 senators, and sometimes 3 senators are not enough to achieve a win. So J.D. Vance is called to the floor to break the tie. The judiciary, they have the district courts, circuit courts, and the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court is the most important court and my favorite piece of Lego. So this is a Supreme Court made by Lego, made in Lego form. Oh, this is a bit. And here you have the hearing room of the Supreme Court. We have 9 justices with lifetime appointments. So when a president appoints a justice, is very important. And Republicans were able to nominate 3 justices recently because Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who was a liberal, died before the election, the re-election between Donald Trump and Joe Biden, and Joe Biden won, but they were able to put Amy Coney Barrett in their place. It's not foreseeable how they will vote. Chief Justice John Roberts, Amy Coney Barrett, Neil Gorsuch, sometime in Brett Kavanaugh, even all the three justices nominated by Donald Trump voted against him in some rulings, in some recent rulings. The most important rulings are known in the summer, in June. And for people who love American law, it's a very important time of the year to follow the rulings of the Supreme Court. The President Biden nominated to replace one justice. He nominated Ketanji Brown Jackson, who is the first black woman justice in the Supreme Court. Then we have Clarence Thomas, who is very conservative, who was nominated by President Bush, the father. And we have also Samuel Alito, the first Latino. He's not the first Latino. The first Latino was Antonin Scalia, who was nominated by Ronald Reagan, who also nominated the first woman justice in the Supreme Court, who was Sandra Day O'Connor, who died in December 2023. So the Supreme Court is very alive, and it's very important to know who these justices are, because they are superstars in law in America. The first case that we will study next week is Marbury versus Madison, who establishes judicial review and said that courts can invalidate laws that conflict with the Constitution. After that, a case in Fletcher versus Peck, 1810, protected contracts from retroactive legislation, and it also stated that state laws could be judicially reviewed too. So not only laws from Congress, but also laws from state Congresses. Then a very infamous ruling of the Supreme Court is Dred Scott versus Sanford, who upheld slavery. Is a dark chapter later overturned on. It was only possible to have overturned this case by the 13th Amendment, who banished slavery. And I have there in purple the declaration, the Emancipation Declaration, was announced by President Lincoln. This was also very important. Another case to view civil rights is Brown versus Board of Education in 1954, who ended racial segregation in schools. In Roe versus Wade and Dobbs versus Jackson, abortion rights were reinterpreted, and then the power was devolved to the states. So it was considered that women had a right to abortion, and then this right was decided that only states decided who will be able to legislate about abortion. So I also have other cases here that I would like to talk to you about. If you want to read my book, as hundreds of cases of the Supreme Court about different issues. But Obergefell versus Hodges in 2015 legalized same-sex marriage. Plessy versus Ferguson was the case that preceded Brown versus Board. It's from 1896. It stated that we were separate but equal. So it was better than slavery, but it was worse than equality. And it wasn't the best solution. About presidential powers and accountability, the US versus Nixon case in 1974 forced President Nixon to release the Watergate tapes, and he then renounced his post as president. Four justices nominated by him voted against him in this case. So, and also in Trump versus Vance, they held a subpoena in 2020, and the Supreme Court held a subpoena for tax records and obliged President Trump to deliver his tax records to the court, and also this ruling was also possible with votes by justices nominated by him. So, freedom of speech and religion. Citizens United versus FEC in 2010 is a very questionable case too. It gave unlimited corporate political spending to political persons, to corporations have the right to free speech, and this is not very easy to understand. Trinity Lutheran versus Comer in 2017, they understood that religious institutions are eligible for public funding. In almost all European countries, this is possible, but in the United States, they are much more strict about the separation of state and religion. So this was problematic. The composition and influence of SCOTUS. SCOTUS is the Supreme Court of the United States. It's SCOTUS. We have the originalists like Scalia, Clarence Thomas, Amy Coney Barrett. They think that Constitution shall be interpreted as originally intended. Other justices like Justice Ginsburg, Breyer, Sotomayor think that we must have a living constitutionalism. So Constitution evolved with society. Most recent important justices are Antonin Scalia. He was a very fat man. He was the best friend of the most liberal justice. So Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg was his best friend, and he was her best friend. So not they were a case of not of transcending political ideas to be friends, and she was a liberal champion of gender equality. John Roberts is the Chief Justice and is often a swing vote. He's a very moderate, very institutionalist. I love his positions. He's usually very ponderant, and he tries not to speak against President Trump, but sometimes he also has to. Clarence Thomas is nowadays the longest serving justice. He's deeply conservative, and he was the silent Thomas, but he's talking now more. But he thinks that lawyers should be able to talk in court and should not be interrupted as much times as all his colleagues do. And this is a very nice idea. Ketanji Brown Jackson was the first black woman on the court. He's a progressive voice. She was also an official lawyer before being introduced to the court. So she was a defender, a public defender of some terrorists of Guantanamo, and she was presented by a Republican, by the Speaker of the House, who is a brother-in-law. Washington is very small, and she's very important. So, in conclusion, Alexander Hamilton once called the judiciary the least dangerous branch of the three branches. And today, the Supreme Court of the United States is arguably one of the most powerful judicial bodies in the world. Its decisions shape not only American law, but also influence legal systems globally, including ours. I think that as students of comparative law, understanding the US legal system help us grasp the dynamics of constitutional interpretation, federalism, and the role of courts in shaping society. So if you have any doubts, you can send them via email to me. I hope you are finishing your papers, and I hope you enjoyed this lesson. Bye-bye.